there's real correlation between the battles in Joshua and the battles that we face, spiritual battles. And there are lessons we can learn from these promised land battles that will help us with our own struggles. And I see this all the way through these battles in Canaan. And today we come to another one of those, not necessarily a battle, but just a situation that happened here at the beginning of their entrance into the promised land that I think you will find insightful. And like I said, what we learn from these promised land battles will help us with our own struggles with temptation, with the spiritual battles that we face in our homes and with our friends and family. There are lots of things we can learn here that will help us. You know, there's this tendency that we have when we are under the attack of the evil one to kind of get depressed. You know, we beat ourselves up. You know, why am I falling to this temptation? Or why do I let my anger get the best of me? Or whatever it happens to be. We tend to beat ourselves up for our failures. But really, the battles we face should be an indication that we're on the right track sometimes. The fact that Satan has targeted us should tell us that perhaps we're on the right track. We need to pursue on. And we see this with Israel. Each time Israel gained a victory, right around the corner seemed to be some new temptation or a new struggle that they faced. And this cycle with Israel over and over again, all the way through the Old Testament, we see this pattern. And the event we're going to look at today, this deceit of the Gibeonites, I think stands as an illustration of the clever nature of our enemy. There's an old word, we don't use it much anymore, but he's very wily. He's very tricky, and he has schemes, and he can fool us. And if he can't snag us with one method, he'll move on and try another one until he can get us. He just keeps trying. He's very resourceful. And like we'll see today, sometimes he disguises himself as an angel of light. You know, not all those who come in the name of the Lord are really one of God's emissaries. Not everyone who comes in the name of the Lord is an emissary of the Lord. Not everyone who proclaims that they have God's message are actually messengers of the Lord. And as Christians, we're called to have discernment. We're called to be careful and to be on the alert because Satan is full of tricks. We must always be on the alert and apply discernment. Have you ever felt like maybe in the midst of some struggle you were facing, that what you were facing was friendly fire? Like, why is it that those closest to me are the ones that are causing the most difficulty? Sometimes we feel that way. Satan is gifted at using those in the visible church to attack the real work of God that's going on among us all the time. And that's one of his schemes. There's a reason why there are so many warnings in Scripture in the New Testament, something like 17 warnings in the New Testament about watching out for those who would come into our fellowship, into the church, and to stir things up. I always say that the fox does the most damage when he's inside the hen house. And this is true in the church. You know, we worry about, these big detonations that Satan might set off. But really the most dangerous tools he has are the really sneaky ones. The schemes that he has that we're sometimes unaware of. I wrote an article about this on my website. If you want to go look at it, it's my website is kdouglasbrown.com. There's an article there called An Inside Job about how the evil one looks to get in among us and stir up trouble. I think you would find that beneficial. And we must take to heart what Paul said to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 2:11. He said, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. That's if we're a mature Christian, we're not going to be unaware that he's very tricky and that he has schemes and he's very gifted at getting at us. But it's encouraging to know that we can have victory because of our relationship with the Lord, and we can take our stand on the truths that are in God's Word. And I'd like to go right now and read this story, this deception of the Gibeonites, and see what we can learn from this morning. It's in Joshua 9. Now it came about when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland and on all the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite heard of it, that they gathered themselves together with one accord to fight with Joshua and with Israel. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also acted craftily and set out as envoys, and took worn-out sacks on their donkeys, and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, and worn out and patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes on themselves. And all the bread of their provision was dry and had become crumbled. And they went to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us." And the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you are living within our land. How then shall we make a covenant with you?" But they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Then Joshua said to them, "Who are you and where do you come from?" And they said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country, because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we heard the report of him, and all that he had done in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and to Og, king of Bashan, who also was at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go meet them, and say to them, We are your servants. Now make a covenant with us.' This our bread was warm when we took it for our provisions out of our houses on the day we left to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and has become crumbled. And these wineskins which we filled were new. And behold, they are torn. And these, our clothes and our sandals, are worn out because of the very long journey." So the men of Israel took some of their possessions and did not ask for the counsel of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. And it came about at the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, that they heard that they were neighbors, and they were living within their land. Then the sons of Israel set out and came to the cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. And the sons of Israel did not strike them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And the whole congregation grumbled against the leaders. But all the leaders said to the whole congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them. This we will do to them, even let them live, lest wrath be upon us for the oath which we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for the whole congregation, just as the leaders had spoken to them. Joshua called for them and spoke to them, saying, "Why have you deceived us, saying, 'We are from very far from you,' when you are living within our land? Now therefore you are cursed, and you shall never cease being slaves, both hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of God. So they answered Joshua and said, because it was certainly told your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. Therefore, we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and have done this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hands. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. Thus he did to them, and delivered them from the hands of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day, in the place which he would choose. This was quite a deception by these Gibeonites. You know, they heard the record of Moses, that God had given the Israelites this land. They knew of this reputation, and so they crafted this deceit to trick the Israelites into making a covenant with them. They also knew enough that these were going to be people of their word, and if they could acquire a treaty with them under oath, they knew that Israel would have to honor it, and that's what they accomplished. There's a couple of really interesting facts before we kind of get into a discussion about this. I find this really fascinating. They had just conquered Jericho, and then there was the sin of Achan and the failure at Ai, followed by a victory at Ai. So they're coming off of 2 out of 3 really good victories. They were in a place where they had been trusting the Lord. They were coming off of a victory. And then they were deceived by these people from Gibeon. I find it really interesting that the city of Gibeon is only 7 miles from Ai. That's how bamboozled they were. 7 miles away. That's like, what is that? That's the distance from here to the mall. It's nothing. They could have walked there in, a couple of hours. And these were the people that tricked them, saying they were from so far off. And they knew that they had been instructed to do away with all the peoples of the land. All the Canaanites were to be done away with. And now they've been tricked into this situation with the Gibeonites. Back in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 7, are the instructions from Moses. It might be helpful to go back there and kind of remind ourselves what they were told when they went into the promised land. Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 7. When the Lord your God shall bring you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and shall clear away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God shall deliver them before you, and you shall defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, and show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. But thus you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, and smash their sacred pillars, and hew down their Asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all the people who are on the face of the earth. Then the Lord did not set his love on you. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any of these people, for you were the fewest of all the people. This is the promise of the Lord and the instruction that they were to go into the land and destroy everyone who was in the land. And The Gibeonites knew this, and they played it against the Israelites, saying they were from a far-off land, when in reality, they were just down the road. Another interesting fact that I find here is this follows shortly after the Jericho story, where Rahab did something that was quite similar than what the Gibeonites did. I find some interesting parables with Rahab, who spared her life, and in Hebrews is mentioned in the Hebrews Hall of Fame. The Hall of Faith in Hebrews, she's mentioned there as having done a good thing. So what's the difference between the Gibeonites and what they did and Rahab and what she did? Like the Gibeonites, Rahab was also a native of Canaan. She was under the Canaanite curse. Like the Gibeonites, she had confidence, though, that God was giving the land to the Israelites. The reputation was spread far and wide, and the Canaanites knew what was coming their way. And she knew that and took action based on what she knew. Like the Gibeonites, she responded with fear before God's people. This is recorded back in chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. And like the Gibeonites, Rahab acted with cunning in order that she could spare her family and herself and find refuge among the people of Israel. And like I mentioned, her name appears in the Hebrews Hall of Fame, Hebrews 11:31. By faith, the harlot Rahab perished, not with them that believed not, when she had, you got to make sure you put the comma in the right place. By faith, the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. So she's mentioned in Hebrews as somebody who did an act of faith. So what's the difference between what she did and what the Gibeonites? They were all trying to save their neck. Why is Rahab listed in the Hall of Faith? I believe it's because she chose to align with God's people. She put herself before the people in an act of mercy. And she did not act in duplicity. She didn't use dishonesty with the Israelites. She just honestly went to them and asked for mercy. And she helped them, whereas the Gibeonites used deceit. They were saying one thing while they meant another. I really think that there's something to be learned from that fact. The fact that both of them were acting out of self-preservation, both Rahab and the Gibeonites. But the one acted in deception and duplicity, and the other came under the authority of the Lord and placed themselves in submission to God's people. I think there's a big difference, and I think that says something about the heart of God, even for people who are outside of His will. That God is very concerned about honesty and duplicity. Proverbs 11:3 says, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity." That's a promise from the Lord that we can build our lives around. And it's interesting that both Rahab and the Gibeonites, both because of what they had done, went on to live among the Israelites. It says in our passage here that the Gibeonites went on to serve in the temple and provide water and chop wood for the Israelites. For years this went on. I'll mention this in a little bit. Same with Rahab. Somewhere along the way, there was a conversion that happened for Rahab, where she became one of the people under God's blessing. Well, in this story, I see for us some lessons. I think there's, in this passage, 3 things that can lead to defeat. When we think about our own spiritual battles, I think we can draw from this passage 3 things that can lead to our defeat. The first one is falling for deceit. The first thing that can lead to our defeat is falling for deception. In this story, the level of deceit is just astounding. It almost reads like a children's cartoon, these antics that the Gibeonites had put on. There's the obvious, the old torn wineskins, the moldy bread. Some versions of the Bible translate it moldy bread. Some say it's crumbled bread. Either way, this bread is old. The tattered footwear. When we left, our shoes were in great shape, but now they're all torn up. Today, we might kind of label this talk as framing, as changing the narrative, the spin. God calls it lies and duplicity. Saying one thing, but really another is true. The Gibeonites knew this recent story, the recent history of the Jews and how they came out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. These are stories that were spread throughout Canaan. And they were careful. This is the level of deceit. The Gibeonites were careful not to mention the close-up history with Jericho and Ai. They don't mention that. They mention the history long off, because maybe mentioning Ai and Jericho would tip off to Joshua and the Israelites that they actually lived pretty close. So they had this story down. They had this rehearsed. They knew what to say and what not to say. The Gibeonites also knew that the Jews were forbidden from making alliances and treaties with those within the land. They knew what they had to do in order to secure a treaty. It was very deceptive. And they even played to the religiosity of the Jews, stating that they had come because of the fame of the Lord. Who can argue with that? Look at them. They're talking about the fame of our God. Well, what is this? This fame of what does that mean? Well, some versions of the Bible say the name of the Lord. The name of the Lord has to do with his reputation, his character. And they're saying to the Israelites, we know about the wonderful character of your God. It's really a very flattering thing to say to them. They knew what they needed to say, and they were saying all the right things. And here they are, using God's character as a calling card. Think about the irony here. These are the pagan people who, through history, had rejected God and fallen away from the blessing that comes under the umbrella when you stay within the family of God. They had rejected that down through the generations and had practiced their pagan religions that were horrible. Temple prostitution and child sacrifice were common. These were not just, squatters in the land. They were pagan people that God wanted eliminated from his land. They knew exactly what they needed to say, and they were very good at their manipulation. So one thing that can find us in a place of defeat is falling for deception. Another thing is, I believe, neglecting prayerful trust. This is something we've talked about here before. The Israelites were so taken in by the Gibeonites and their moldy cakes that they neglected to ask the Lord what he thought about this situation. They got ahead here. They didn't really need to have this alliance at all, really. And they just forgot to take it to the Lord. The leaders must have thought to themselves, look here, here we are in the land, and we've got God's blessing, and we don't even have to go to these people. They're coming to us. They're falling at our feet wanting to make treaties. What a wonderful thing that is. Well, they forgot to ask the Lord what he thought. How easy it is, even in the service of the Lord, to take for granted his guidance and his blessing. It's a temptation for us as well, to forget to go to the Lord and ask for his guidance, to run ahead of the Lord. I was talking with one of our members this last week about the temptation that we face, Casey and I and the leaders, to kind of run ahead of God and force his agenda. here at One Hope Community Church. But looking back and seeing how God has brought us this far and all the things that He has done, we need to continue to trust in the Lord and to lean on Him in prayerful trust as we move forward. So there's falling for deceit. There's neglecting prayerful trust. I think the third one is that Joshua and the Israelites ignored some important cues. There were some cues that they had ignored. It's interesting, when these cities are mentioned in Deuteronomy 20:17, they are given the same order. That when these sort of like, these are the bad guys. And whenever they're mentioned, God mentions them in the same order. And here, right at the beginning of the chapter, verses 1 and 2, they're mentioned in the same order. And this should read, for those who were the original readers of this book of Joshua, this should have read like prophecy fulfilled. It should have been a clue. These are the nations that God has warned us about. We should be on high alert against these enemies of the Lord. And they neglected that. Imagine what it would have been like going through as an Israelite, going into a land that you don't know, you've never been there, and you hear about these people, and the names are always mentioned in the same order, but you've not yet encountered them, you've not yet seen them. And then you go into the land, into this unknown place, not knowing the battles that are ahead of you. There must have been a sense of scary anticipation for the Israelites. This should have been a clue. They should have been on alert. They are in enemy territory at this point. And Joshua even mentions to them that these people might be from inside the land. The Israelites mention this. Perhaps you live near us. Where did he get that thought from? Maybe that was just an inkling from the Lord. That it was in the back of their minds. Like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And they went ahead and did it. Discernment is important. But often we're too lazy and too comfortable to give credence to the thoughts that come into our mind that might just be from the Lord. Sometimes the Lord is saying in that still small voice, and sometimes we ignore it. I think all of this overacting should have been a clue as well. It's very dramatic what they were doing. You know, they mentioned the fame of God and what He had done for Israel. They mentioned the two Amorite kings on the other side of the Jordan. It's all flattery. The Amorite kings that the Israelites destroyed. They called attention to their torn and tattered, stained clothing and what was left of their food supplies. I mean, they're really going overboard here. They mentioned the bottles of wine which were filled when they left their distant land, but now are empty. You know, there's reason to be on high alert when someone comes offering help, advertising their pure intentions. I get these texts. You know, maybe you get them too. They want to buy your house. You get those texts? You know, hey, I want to make an offer on your house. So yesterday I got one. I shot them back a price that was way over, you know, and then it went crickets. We should be on high alert. The enemy is all around us. You know, God didn't really need the help of the Gibeonites, did He? The Israelites had the promise. What I read earlier from Deuteronomy 1 through 7, God said, I will give them into your hand. They didn't need a treaty with the enemies of the Lord. They just needed to lean on the Lord and trust in Him. Beware of those who claim to be agents of the Lord. Those who declare pure intentions often don't have them. It's really a sign for us. God doesn't need people who come in and advertise that they're doing a good work. Good works don't need advertisement, do they? They speak for themselves, especially when they're deeds that are done in the name of the Lord. Don't need to advertise our good works. We, as followers of the Lord, just need to trust in the Lord. Then in 9:16, I love this. Joshua 9:16. Now, these 5 kings had fled and hidden themselves. No, I'm in the wrong place. The chapter off. 9:16. And it came about at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them that they heard that they were neighbors and that they were living within their land. 3 days was all it took, and boom, we got fooled. And I can just imagine the anger among the Israelites when they came to realize they bought in hook, line, and sinker. The whole works. You know, at first glance, you would think that this would completely throw off the plan of God for the Israelites going into the land of Canaan. You would think this would have thrown off the whole thing. You know, here they are. They're supposed to wipe out all the nations in the land of Canaan. And now they're locked in permanently, with these enemies of the Lord. Now, how is God going to fulfill His promises to the Israelites to give them the whole land? It almost seems like it's off course now, and it can't be fixed. They've really hamstrung themselves from eliminating all the people from the land. And these Gibeonites went on to live in that land for years to come. There's a situation over in 2 Samuel where King Saul broke this treaty and attacked the Gibeonites. This is a long time after this time of Joshua. And then later still, during the time of David, there was a famine that occurred in Israel, and they realized that the famine was the work of the Lord because Saul had gone and done this thing with the Gibeonites and broken the treaty. God takes very seriously things like honesty and things like oaths and His promises. And so God wasn't going to let this one slide for the Israelites. And the punishment was that they had to put up some relatives of Saul that the Gibeonites were allowed to put to death. And once this had happened, these 7 descendants of Saul were basically killed by the Gibeonites. After that happened, then God's blessing to Israel returned after things were righted. So even after all these years, God was binding the Israelites to the treaty they had made with the Gibeonites, even though it went against the original instruction to go in and wipe out all the peoples. God takes very seriously promises. God takes those things seriously. And you know what I take away from this is that sometimes Satan gets his way. Sometimes he gets his hooks in and gains a victory. But God is really good at handling our failures. God is really good at righting our own wrongs and making things right. He's very good at playing with the shorthand. You ever play a card game where if you don't draw the card, then you play with less in your hand? That's not going to bother God. He can still accomplish His will, even when we choose not to obey Him. This story, I think, serves as an illustration that our enemy is very crafty. He's very wily. He's very deceiving. And he has lots of tricks. When one method fails, he'll go on to the next one. And we need to be on alert constantly. In Ephesians 6:11, we're told to put on the full armor of God so that we can take our stand against the devil's schemes. The King James uses the word, the wiles of the devil, the tricks of the evil one. And thinking about our battles, I think that the evil one is more dangerous in the hidden things than he is in the outright explosions or the outright obvious battles. He's very good at using deception, which is why we as believers are called to be on the alert. We learn from this event that believing a lie can be costly. even if you're not the one that created the lie. Believing a lie can be costly for God's people. God told Israel that all the Canaanites were to be destroyed, but unfortunately, Israel believed the Gibeonites' lies and did as they suggested. They fell right into the trap. Scripture over and over again teaches us to apply wisdom. Proverbs is all about applying wisdom and using the minds that God has given us. And in Matthew 10:16, Jesus said, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. There's reason that these instructions were given to us. We need discernment in this world, especially today. The fact that the Lord held the Israelites to their covenant with the Gibeonites shows that God requires faithfulness of his people. Breaking a covenant is a serious thing. And finally, the eventual incorporation of the Gibeonites into Israel shows that even in our mistakes, that God is merciful and God extends grace when it's not necessary. Well, what do we take away from this lesson? What can I apply to my life this week? A couple of important lessons that I think we can learn. Number one is learn from our mistakes. The mistakes at Ai and Gibeon were not made again in Joshua's lifetime. He didn't make those mistakes again. He learned from his mistakes. And the Christian life is like that. We make mistakes and we need to learn and move forward. God is pretty good at handling the messes we make of our lives. But we shouldn't let our mistakes completely derail us from his work in our lives. Sometimes we have to learn from our mistakes, forsake sin, and get on with it. Sometimes in the Christian life, we need to learn from our mistakes, forsake sin, and get on with it. Number two is this. I think pretty obvious in this story is that we need to learn to consult with God for wisdom when making decisions. Let's not be people who run ahead of the Lord and think that we know better than him. We need to continually go back to the Lord and seek his plans and commit those plans to the Lord. One of my favorite verses is Proverbs 3:5-7. Some of you have memorized this. And because of the nature of our enemy, we will do well to heed the words of Proverbs 3:5-7. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes, but shun evil and fear the Lord.